Hello, everybody, and welcome to yet another edition of the Anthony Pig Consciousness Hour. These are coming thick and fast at the moment, and I feel that I'm spending a good deal of my time chatting with you guys and discussing some fantastic subjects with our incredible guests. Today is, as much as anything else, a really interesting one for me because it's given me the opportunity to speak with a singer-songwriter that I've admired for so long. The wonderful lady that is Mary Fahl. Now, there's an interesting link here with Mary's music and with my own life, because many years ago, way back in 1973, I was a member of the Drama Society at Wirral Grammar School on the Wirral near Liverpool. And we had done a dual production of two plays, and I'd acted in a play called The Fire Raisers by Max Frisch. And the drama teacher at the school was a guy called Chris Simpson. And I believe that Chris Simpson was a member of a band way back in the late 1960s, early 1970s called Magna Carta. And he was on the same record label as Pink Floyd. So he had the opportunity. We had an after performance party, and he said, we've got something special here. And he had a white label version of a brand new Pink Floyd album that was due out. And in the party, we listened to this, and that album was Dark Side of the Moon. So we were in the fortunate position of actually being able to hear the album before it had officially come out. And it was an amazing sensation, immediately knowing that you were listening to something that was going to become literally iconic. And it would be part of rock music history forever and a day. You know, quite extraordinary how we just sensed it straight away. Now, back in 1978, then, roll forward a few years, and I was in Greece, and I was staying in a place called Lindos on Rhodos. And myself and my then girlfriend Jane were walking along the road when, right from seemingly nowhere, this huge Land Rover came roaring around the corner and nearly knocked us off into the side of the road. And the lady got out and she was profusely apologetic. And we got chatting to her, and we discovered that I think she was American, and she and her husband were living locally. And it was only a few days later when we saw her in a bar, we realized that in fact she was Dave Gilmour's wife. So there was a kind of a nice link here. And it links perfectly to Mary's latest album, which is absolutely, well, it's her latest album. She can correct us on this, but it's absolutely extraordinary. And it is her version of The Dark Side of the Moon, which is just incredible. And I'll just tell you a little bit about Mary here from her website. And the description is absolutely accurate. And it says, with a voice for the gods that can transport listeners to other realms, which is what the Boston Globe described Mary's voice as. Mary Fahl is an expressive, emotional singer-songwriter who first achieved fame as lead singer and co-founder of the mid-1990s New York City-based chamber pop group October Project. As a solo artist, she has more freedom to pursue her own muse, whether that means writing and recording songs for movies, including the theme for the Civil War epic Gods and Generals, singing arias and medieval Spanish songs for Sony Classical, or releasing a unique album-length take on The Dark Side of the Moon. As befits a former Catholic schoolgirl who went on to major in medieval studies and developing a lifelong interest in Hermeticism, Mary Fahl makes music that feels timeless, esoteric, and ecumenical. Her elegant cinematic songs draw on classical and world music sources, American art song, as well as Thinking Man's pop folk, which she performs with an earthy, viscerally powerful contralto that bridges the generational gap between Fairport Convention's Sandy Denny and London Grammar's Hannah Reid. Fahl's sound has a hauntingly gothic romanticism that inspired Anna Rice to portray it emanating from a dead woman's room in her 2013 novel, The Wolves of Midwinter. Over the past few years, she's been touring and recording on her own label, Rymar Records, and her recent releases are garnering awards, including an Indie Acoustic Award for Best Live Album for Live at the Mark Chunk Opera House, I hope I pronounced that right, film for PBS, and an Independent Music Award for her recent holiday album, Winter Songs and Carols. Her upcoming release, a Blu-ray 5.1 surround DVD from The Dark Side of the Moon, brilliantly mixed by Bob Clearmountain, has been called the immersive album of the year by Life in Surround. Mary, welcome to Consciousness Hour INCON.
Nice to be here. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while.
Oh, I have been so much looking forward to this, particularly because music is my great love, and I love the music of Sandy Denny, and your voice reminds me a lot of Sandy Denny's work. And what I would like to do now, before we get into this, if I can make the technology work, this is because I have to open up another document here, is to try and load and share with you guys if we get the sound. And Sarah, can you let me know if we do? I'm going to see if I can play and share the screen of a YouTube recording of Mary's performance of Brain Damage Eclipse by Pink Floyd. So if you just bear with me a second, I'll see if I can do this. If I can't, I can't, but I'll just give it a go. And just bear with me a second. Maybe, Sarah, if you want to maybe chat with Mary a little bit while I'm trying to do this and maybe ask one or two questions, and I'll see if I can get it to work.
Relationship with Anne Rice, so maybe you could tell us a little bit about how that work came about.
Back in the day, when October Project, when we were on Sony, Sony had been looking around for some film projects for us, and you know, we got into a few movies, but we really wanted to get a song into Interview with the Vampire, you know, with Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt. We did not get the gig, but you know, our music was very sort of neo-goth sounding and very cinematic in its own way. So we didn't get the gig, but years later, a fan of Anne's had brought us to her attention, and out of the blue, one rainy afternoon, I got an email from her, and I'm thinking, this can't be, it's just the Anne Rice, but it was, and we developed an online friendship, and so she began posting on her, you know, huge Facebook page everything that we had ever done, everything I had ever done, and she's very generous spirit. And so when she was releasing a new book, and I knew she was going to be in New York, so I said to her, Anne, I'd love for you to hear my new record. I'll have a friend bring it over to your hotel room. And so I had my friend Irene bring it over, and Anne was very gracious with her. And as my friend was leaving, Anne handed her the galley of her upcoming book, and she had inscribed something very nice to me. And she said, tell Mary she's in the book. It was like, oh my God. So my friend Irene turned around and said, you know, Anne, what if Mary were to write a song for the audiobook version of this new book you have coming out? And she said, oh, well, do you think she'd do it? And my friend said, oh, don't worry about it. Yes, consider it done. Okay.
Oh, I love that.
So she calls me from the street, my friend, and says, you know, so Random House is on board, and da-da-da, you have to have, and I said, whoa, when do I have to have this done by? And she said, yeah, that's the thing. They kind of need it in a week. I was like,
oh, she's so brilliant.
So, if you know how long it takes to, you know, write and produce it, it's like, but I called my friend John Lissauer, who's my producer, and we co-write sometimes. And John writes for a lot of film. So what I did, I wrote the lyric, and then it was so easy for me. We worked so well together. John was best known for producing a lot of the early Leonard Cohen records. So but he's very good when I give him a map, an emotional map, because that's the way I sing. And I said, so at this point, I want it to have a sort of, you know, minor key with a big fat, you know, drum sound. And then at a certain point, I want you to take a leap as if you're leaping up in an unexpected place. And then I want it to really soar. So I could just talk to every point that I needed in there, and bingo, he did that within a day. And I came up and I sang the song, and we mixed it, and we got it just just under the wire into Random House, and it made the book. So that was really fun.
Wow, that does sound brilliant. And did you ever visit her in her New Orleans mansion?
No. By the time I got to know Anne, she had already sold that and moved out to California, around the Coachella area.
Okay, I think now I've managed to set it up. So if I can try and share the screen now, and I hope I can make it work. It looks like it's going to work. Okay, can you see the screen on there?
There, yes.
Excellent, good, it's worked so far. Okay, let's see if we can.
Can I hear it? Can you hear it?
Sound isn't working, Anthony.
You have to turn the sound up on the YouTube itself, I think, Anthony. Yeah, right there. Just turn it up. All the way. Yeah, it's not there.
Still no sound. Can you hear it, Anthony? Because we can't hear it.
I think what we'll do is we'll give up for now. I can't seem to get the technology to work in the way I would like it to, which is a bit annoying.
Well, they can see the video to watch later.
Yeah, they can. Which we'll do is we'll give you the links later to listen to the songs, if that's okay with you guys. Right, so let's see if I can get back now to Zoom, which should be there. Oh, that's good. I seem to have lost Zoom now. Bear with me, please. This is quite annoying, but one of those things. Yeah, okay. Okay, we're back. Normal. Sorry about that, folks. I thought it was going to try and make it work, but we couldn't. But I think you got some vague idea about Mary's work there. So Mary, tell us a little bit about your career, how you started as a singer, because it's always intrigued me as how one manages to do this with so much competition and things as well. So a little bit about background about that.
Well, first of all, I always sang. I mean, I could, my mother says I could sing before I could talk. So it's just what I always did. You know, I think you can tell with small children, like what direction they're going to head in, you know, and I was sort of, I knew it was my tribe. Do you know what I mean? And so, you know, as I was growing up, I, you know, taught myself to play guitar, and I was lucky that I grew up in a very large Irish German Catholic family, and I had older siblings, much older siblings. My sister is 12 years older than me, so they were teenagers when I was small, and they had just so much music in the house, you know, and we had the big console in the living room, and so my sister was into all the great 60s female singers like Petula Clark and Dusty Springfield and all those kind of people. And then my brothers were my oldest brother was into all of the folk music of the era, Tom Paxton and Dylan Phil Oakes and all those kind of people. And then my other brother was the more, I guess, rock guy, but prog in particular. And that's where I got to hear Pink Floyd for the first time. And of all of the things that he listened to, I resonated with Pink Floyd the most. When I look back, I think it was because to me it was sort of, it was not his typical boy music. It was sort of boy music for girls. And I resonated with the lyrics. I resonated with the majesty of it in a way. And I never got over that.
Which was your first Pink Floyd album that you got into then?
It was Dark Side of the Moon.
Okay.
That was the one. That was boom, you know. And so and then I, you know, all during that time I just always sang. I performed in school plays and things like that. And but I didn't write music at the time. And you know, as I was coming of age in the music business, you sort of, if you were a white girl in the music business, you had to write your own songs, you know, and for the most part, and in the pop music industry. So I ended up going to university and I studied medieval history, and I really didn't know, I mean, that was a silly thing to study, but I'm still very interested in it, but it didn't have any practical application in the real world. But I got out of school and I was in New York. I, you know, sort of tried to get, you know, sort of a little fledgling music career going, but I couldn't find a group of people that I resonated with. And finally, I sort of had given up and thought, I've got to do something with my life. I mean, I had all different kinds of jobs supporting myself. It was a very challenging time. It's hard. And I had applied for a postgraduate pre-med program at Columbia, so that you would just spend 2 years taking all of the required science and math courses. And I was ready to go. I wanted to, I was thinking that I'd want to go into medicine of some kind. And just at the last minute, I mean, I was signed up, you know, got my loans, and I met Julie Flanders through a friend. And this is where the Damon comes in. The Damon's like, no, don't do that, Barry. You can't go. You've got to get you back to where you. Look, I mean, in the meantime, during those years when I was sort of just trying to stay alive in New York and make a living, I really, really got into so many different kinds of music, and was just learning about just feeding my soul in ways that I needed to grow as a person and as a musician. And so by the time I met October Project, all of that had integrated into the way that I sang. So my voice was ready, and I met Julie, and we became friends, and she brought me out to meet her boyfriend, her partner at the time, still is, Emil Adler. And she said, you should hear some of the music that we've been writing. And I sat down, and it was one of those moments that are very rare in life, where I started singing with the music as if I already knew it. That's what it felt like for me. And I knew in that moment, it was never a doubt in my mind, we're going to form a band and we're going to get a deal. There was never a doubt in my mind after. It was just all, for me, green lights. And the only other time I felt that way is when I met my husband. And when there he is. There he is.
Hi, you're being talked about in a positive way.
In a positive way. So we ended up working really hard. All of us were a little older than, you know, the typical time that you would form a band. All of us were in our late 20s, and it was do or die. Failure was simply not an option, because we all were, again, we weren't happy doing our day jobs, and this was it. And we knew we had something very special, and we worked and worked and worked at it. to develop a unique sound, which for me was, the beautiful soaring melodies of October Project and very, very passionate lyrics, and I think the gorgeous harmonies. And we started getting gigs around New York and playing New York over and over and over again.
Why did you call it October Project?
We were looking around for names, and everything sounded pretentious that we were coming up with. And then
I was going to say, you could have come up with Toad the Wet Sprocket.
Exactly. And so we asked Emil, what's most important to you? Like, what do you love in your life? And he said, I love my files. And I said, what do you file us under? And we were filed under October Project. And so
oh, wow.
The name stuck, and that was that. And so anyway, we played around New York. We ended up getting a manager, and we fell into a scene that's usually very important. And that scene was at Cafe Chenet, a little Irish cafe on the Lower East Side, and in East Village, kind of Lower East Side. And a lot of people would go there because the owner was friends with a lot of the famous Irish musicians of the day. Sinead O'Connor would pop in, and Bono and people like that. But it was this tiny little cafe. And a lot of record company executives were starting to come down there to scout talent. And so we were one of the people that they scouted. And we ended up getting a deal with Sony and made our record.
What was it like, that feeling of being suddenly getting a record deal? That must be extraordinary.
I mean, we tried so hard, and we had different record labels, kind of coming down and dating us basically, but we hadn't gotten that firm yes. And it was so exciting, and we had worked so hard, and it's tough to get a record deal.
Mm-hmm.
Really, really hard. And so it was exciting. And our producer at the time, Glenn Rosenstein, brought us down to Nashville, because that's where he lived. And we made the record down there. And what was so nice is that Glenn was sort of like a camp counselor, in addition to being a producer. And he would take us all around to the old Nashville joints and introduce us to people. And one of the things that happened when we made the record, I'm a huge George Jones fan, just huge, as many singers are, because he's the real thing. And I learned a lot about breath control from singing along with him. So when we went to make the record, we were at this really what looked like a crummy old recording studio, but it had amazing sound. And they gave me my booth that I was going to do all my vocals in, and the guys were just cleaning it up and setting it up for me. And they said, yeah, George left his stuff here last week. And I was like, George who? Jones? They were like, yeah, he was here all last week singing. I started crying. Oh my God, like he sat in that chair and everything. So I was blown away by that whole idea. I felt like he left some residue of himself in there. And so we did the vocals, and the record was I guess a success for a first record. So we toured. We got to tour with Sarah McLachlan and people like that.
Oh,
and,
really? With Sarah McLachlan? Oh, wow,
summer
she's incredible.
Yes, she is wonderful. Oh. And so we toured and toured with the Crash Test Dummies too. And
wow. Like that.
And then we made our second record also in Nashville. And the record company did not feel that we had a single on that record. And so in those days, it was the beginning of, they give you one shot, and if you don't, they're not going to develop you over time. You either hit it right out of the gate or you're done. So we did not have the hit that they were hoping for on that, and we were dropped. I mean, that was it. Mm. So I felt at the time, I had been starting to experiment with writing and things like that. And I was told in no uncertain terms, and October Project had collaborated with other people in terms of writing, but I was told in no uncertain terms that I would never be allowed to write, ever. and that, you know, I was ready. I felt that where we were going creatively was beginning to be repetitive. And I felt I had learned, as long as we were dropped, it's like, well, I think now is the time to move on. So they moved in their own directions and I went off on my own, and I learned how to write music. I worked with a few people, like I was telling Sarah, Ramsey McLean, who's a really interesting writer and interesting guy. And I worked with a guy named Bob Riley from a band called Grace Pool. And it was probably the most frightening thing I have ever done, because, you know, October Project, I felt set the bar very high for songwriting. And so to know that I had to be at least on a par with that, or it would be a disaster. And again, I don't want to sing something that's bad just because I wrote it. I don't have an ego about my writing at all. So it had to be something that I'd want to sing over and over again. So I just worked and worked and worked at it. And you have to have the courage to be bad at something in order to get good at it, you know, and I just had to develop that muscle. And finally, when I had a set of songs that I felt good about, I started making demos, and I made so many mistakes along the way. But I learned, and I learned from each mistake. And finally, I got a great producer in Jeffrey Lesser. And he said, Mary, the songs are good. It's just you need these to be produced the right way. And so he got me, you know, we worked with great musicians. You know, I got Tony Garnier, who's a friend of Ramsey, who's Bob Dylan's music director and bass player, and just different people. And suddenly it all gelled. And I started shopping this. I had made an EP. I started shopping it around, and I still got a lot of no's. And so I thought, well, as long as I probably am not going to get another deal, I might as well just really start doing songs that I'm interested in too. And so I started singing things like Ben Indi Habibi. And that's a song from medieval Spain, medieval Andalusia. And I wouldn't do an entire set of that sort of stuff. I think that would be just a little too obscure for my audience, but I certainly started incorporating classical music and different things in. And that's when I came to the attention of one classical label. They started coming down. They were looking for interesting crossover projects. And I didn't like what they had in mind for me. I thought I didn't work this hard to sort of do something schlocky. So I just sort of distanced myself, and then Sony Classical got wind of what I was doing, and they came down to see me, and then they wanted me to come up and audition for them. And this was a week after 9/11 had happened. And I had no band. My band was stranded. The people that I had been working with, I'd been playing out live. I had put together this really nice band for myself, and that I had hired. And I had to go in with someone who I had just met, you know, a pianist. And I went up to the Sony Classical building. It was pouring rain out. I remember I got caught in the rain. I looked like a drowned rat. And here's where this is sort of where the Damon shows up for me, because that day I've done those showcase auditions, and they're really hard. They're so hard to do. It's a really artificial environment. And, you know, you have suits sitting there like this, like, impress me, you know, and I should have been a wreck that day, an absolute wreck. But something came over me, and I was so calm. It was sort of that when they talk about that peace that surpasses understanding, just washed over me. And I remember when Peter Gelb, who was the head of Sony Classical at the time, he heads up the Metropolitan Opera now, but he was the head of Sony. He walked in, and I felt that I had known him all my life when he walked in. That was something very familiar. That was one thing. And then I started singing for them. I sang a few of my own songs. I sang Ben Indi Habibi for them. And then they said, would you sing something classical for us? And I said, well, sure. What would you like? I mean, I started laughing. I said, would you like me to sing Nessa Dorma? And they said, do you know it? I knew it because I like opera. And again, my voice doesn't fit neatly into any one category. So I know a lot of tenor arias that I've sung along with for years. So I had a book with me of arias, and I just said to my piano player, can you play this? And I can sing it in the original key. And he said, sure. And so I started singing Nessun Dorma, and something happened that I will never forget. And it isn't just from my perspective. People from the company later told me something clicked in the room. It was almost like the flick of a light switch. And I felt like something entered the room. I know this, I can talk about this stuff with you because you are open to sort of numinous experiences, but I felt that if I must be honest, that I felt the presence of my ancestors in the room. Now, this is not something I focused on, or I wasn't thinking, I wasn't doing some sort of invocation of them or anything. It happened spontaneously, and something was like electrical was in the air. And I remember thinking, I thought about all of my ancestors who had come to the United States and pooled their money and worked so hard and, put my parents through college and wanted a better life. And I thought, I cannot let you down here. Wow. And so I sang the song, which is, of course, the song about being victorious and everything. And I remember that moment, Peter Gelb, they were all just sitting there. And then Peter Gelb said, come on over here, Mary, sit down over here next to me. And he said, we would really like you on this label. What would you think about that? And I was like, what do you think? I think of me. I was just shocked. And, the funny thing about that was too, they never do that. They never, they always kind of dangle things or tease, well, we'll have to go and think about it. So that was just shocking. And I remember when they all left the room, my producer, Jeffrey Lesser, was there, and he said, I don't know what just happened, but I've never seen anything like that. And it was something magical happened. And so anyway, I did a record for Sony Classical, and they wanted me to write for film. And I knew they were doing a Civil War film, and my dad and I love history, from all different eras. But my dad and I shared a love of Civil War history. And so I knew they were doing Gods and Generals, and I went back, I read the Jeff Shara novel, and I started writing the song. And I wanted it to sort of have a feel of a Stephen Foster song. He was sort of the pop songwriter of the Civil War era, but also sort of have a modern feel, but tell the story. And that's something I'm good at doing that. I like writing for film or for books. I like having a context to work within. And it's much harder for me to write for my own life. So I wrote the song, and then I was almost done with it, and I found out that they had given Bob Dylan the gig. So once again, and I thought, oh, well, I might as well just finish it. I've come this far. So I didn't put any work into the demo, really. I didn't tart it up and I just, very simple piano, guitar. And I gave it to my A&R rep there. And, what I said, whatever. So the director of the film happened to be up in the building a few weeks later. And they said, we'd like you to hear something. And they said, no, we've got all the music. We're done. They said, but, just listen, just take a listen. So they brought him into this very sterile conference room, and they played the song for him, Going Home, which is what I wrote. And they said he got up from his chair, and he put his hand on one of the, they had the big speakers, the big giant Sony speakers in the room. And he put one hand on the speaker and another one on his heart. and he said, she really gets this. She gets what I was going for in the film. So they ended up putting my song at the beginning of the film, and then they put Bob Dylan's in at the end of the film. So they sort of bookended it. But, you know, it's very strange. I feel as if, and again, you know, I bring up the Damon because it's sort of how I have, because of that book, it's a way for me to sort of reframe every experience that happened to me, that it happens for a reason. But it's also, I find that the thread through all these things is writing what you love, not doing something to appeal to any commercial. I got the deal because I ended up doing things I loved, you know, and that didn't have any obvious commercial appeal. And or writing, you know, again from history, or writing, even if finishing it, even when there was no chance of it getting in. When I do that, I feel like I'm in, you know, my dharma, as you would say, or in sync with working with that Damon higher self, whatever you want to call it, and it works with me, and it puts little things in my path, and sometimes even when you get terrible disappointments, which in the music business is just par for the course, you know, you have to develop a very, very tough hide in order to remain in this business as long as I have, you know, and I found that with the disappointments I've had, like labels folding, things like that, which happened to me after Dark Side of the Moon. I finished the record, it was about to come out, and V2 Records, which was a really fun label, they ran out of money, they closed their doors, and that was that. I had to buy back the rights. And but sometimes it's sort of like, you know, your Damon, your higher self saying, okay, you know, this is a rerouting now. I need to reroute you. You've done that, that's great. Now we're going to go over here. And sometimes you need to take a break and feed your soul as an artist. That's one thing I tell people that are just starting out, is that you have to nourish that artistic side of yourself, not just with the practice or, you know, developing the muscles needed, the writing muscles, but you have to feed your soul. And so I took a year or two off to do that. I learned how to grow a garden. I was always interested in biodynamic gardening, but it seemed daunting to me because I knew nothing about it. So I just immersed myself in that. And I always remembered reading about Bob Dylan when he was a young artist in New York, and you know, in the folk scene in New York, and that when he was sleeping on other people's couches, he would feed himself artistically with French poetry and, you know, just input. It's just really, really important. And I find nowadays, I other than you and a few other people that I really love on Facebook, Thomas Sheridan is one of those people that I really, I love his work, and a few other people. I don't spend a lot of time on social media anymore because I find that it is, it begins to peck away at your soul after a while, and I just can't do it. So again, I'll check messages, I'll go on quickly, I'll check you, a few of my friends, that's it. And I barely look at Twitter at all. I've had to take a break from that, and I've just been going back into just working on my music and things like that. So that
Wow.
I warned you that I wouldn't run out of things to talk about.
Oh,
So
that was just simply wonderful to hear and quite fascinating. And I'm sure that Thomas Sheridan will be more than happy. Whenever Thomas and I get together, it's like an explosion of ideas, and, you know, we can talk for hours about things. And he's such a great guy.
It's such a very refreshing perspective on everything we're going through right now that has really helped me get through all of this. So I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, he's his own man. That's the thing about Thomas. You know, he will not just say things just because he think people wants to hear them. You know, he will just do it. And he has been a previous guest on this show, and he was wonderful. And I must get him back on there. Now, one of the questions that's come through, which in the chat room, is from David Wood, and it's a really interesting one. And it's, has Mary ever had lyrics or melodies come to her in dreams, or sometimes I wonder the muse or the daemon? And it'll be interesting to know that. Has that happened to you?
Not that I can recall. That's a really good question, because, and it's interesting because I am a lucid dreamer, you know, and I've been trying to develop that muscle over time and keep a journal and you know, develop little techniques. You know, when you're there, you look at your hands, you look at an object, you keep an object next to them, things like that. But no, the best way for me, and again, one of the reasons I've switched off of most of social media, is walking. I walk a lot, and if walking and not bringing, you know, headphones with me, which I'm kind of a podcast addict at this point, so I had to just stop it, and except for people like you and Thomas, and that's it. I find when I walk a lot that's when things come to me, and I've been I've been working on a French record, actually. Again, one of those things that has no commercial viability whatsoever, but it's music that I love, and especially music from that pre-war, you know, turn of the century, pre-World War I Paris. Wow, so yes. You know, time, if I could go back to any time, I love that sort of occult Paris, you know, which especially with the tie-in with Satie and Debussy and all of that, and very, very interested in that period of time. And so I do some Satie and Debussy and Ravel, and I do it my way, like a folk song, basically. A lot of those songs were, I mean, the melodies are so beautiful that they hold up under just, you can break them down into simple renderings, and they're beautiful. So
Mary, that would be extraordinary to hear you do Satie and Debussy, because your voice would just meld with it, wouldn't it? It'd be
well, the other thing, I mean, it's the music of my soul. I mean, that's how I feed my ears, you know, and especially Ravel. You know, like the accompaniments alone blow my, it's like, oh my God. And so I just recorded
because Sony Classics, didn't they? I've got it in my collection. Sony Classics did a theme of French Impressionist music.
Yeah.
And that was wonderful. Yeah.
Philippe Entremont does a whole collection of the Ravel piano works. He's my favorite interpreter of Ravel. But so I do the Three Beautiful Birds of Paradise, Les Trois Beaux Oiseaux du Paradis, and that is one of the most beautiful songs. I said it's so delicious you could eat it. I mean, it's like, it's just so beautiful. So that's been a lot of fun working on that, and I want to finish that up and get that out to people.
Is there a version? Is there a recording of you singing Nessun Dorma?
Yes, I have that, and I do it in the Mock Chunk Opera House. I sometimes like to end my show with that, because it leaves people, it's so uplifting. It's just one of the most beautiful songs I've ever heard. And so yeah, it's on live at the Mock Chunk Opera House. Okay. And I also I like singing Handel, and I've been just trying to get better, you know, on the guitar. So I've been trying to learn various Handel songs, and it helps me just get better. I'm still, you know, I've worked with some of the most wonderful guitar players in the world, so I'm never going to be that good. But I was forced years ago. Again, this is the Damon always at work. My husband, God bless him, this is after I had taken a break. He said, "Why aren't you out performing live?" And I said, I'm kind of done. I can't get my heart broken again. And he's a very no nonsense guy. He said, "Mary, that's horseshit. And so he said, basically, you've got to get back out. And I said, well, I don't want to go out. It's just a girl with a guitar. And he said, why not? Nobody cares. I said, well, I care. So he said, well, if that's what's holding you back, we're going to fix that. And then he dragged me out one summer. He dragged me out kicking and screaming to these horrible open mic nights in the middle of nowhere. And he did this every night. He'd come home and just say, all right, it's like, and I always fancied myself as the non-diva but the diva came out in me that I'm like, I don't do open mic nights, you know, and he's like, well, you're doing it. And so what it did was train me to get comfortable being by myself with just my guitar on a stage with people that don't know me, don't care, aren't October Project fans, aren't even fans of the kind of music I do, and that I could grab the room and hold it, and it just got my confidence going. And the only time it got really horrible was one night at a bar, a kind of divey bar. This girl came up to me after I had performed about 3 songs, and she sidled up to me at the bar, and she said, she was a little worse for wear and tear, and she said, you sound just like that girl from October Project. You must be like the biggest Mary Fahl fan in the world.
Oh my word.
He's like, not so much. So anyway, but
that's almost like the story, isn't it, of Charlie Chaplin came second in the Charlie Chaplin impersonation competition once.
Did he really?
Yeah, he did, yeah. But that must be so weird. And she must have felt really, oh, that is just such a classic story. One of the tunes that I think, one of the songs that I'd love to hear you sing, we were discussing it before we started, is Late November by Sandy Denny.
Yeah.
And I just think that you could do such a wonderful interpretation of that incredible song, you know, just as a thought, that would be wonderful to hear that.
Yeah, you know, I've recorded on my Winter Songs and Carols record, I did a Sandy song.
Which one did you do?
A wintry song. I did, they said that it was snowing in astounded tones on the news. I love that song.
Yeah, shivers up the spine.
Yeah. And I edited the song just a little bit and shortened it a little bit and tidied it up, I think. And I've just always resonated with that song. And I've been thinking about doing I'm a Dreamer maybe on a sometime. There's so much I could, you know.
There is.
I was even thinking it'd be fun to do sort of a record of all of those British female singers that were so, you know, pivotal in terms of my development as a singer. I don't sound like them because I don't have the British inflection, but I come from the same place, sort of in my musical soul. Linda Thompson, I love her. We were talking about June Tabor. She's just, you know, that's like a master class in song interpretation. So I don't know, you know, I'm very chatty. I've been starved for conversation, so
it's
I know
all right. No, we've got as much time as you want.
I'm going off on different tangents, but I try to bring it on back home too.
Please don't. This is what INCON is all about. You know, it's going to those places. Because I was thinking, for instance, you know, the song The Sea. And particularly a lot of the Sandy Denny stuff she did when she was with Fotheringay. She only did one album with Fotheringay, but with your particular interest in medievalism as well. And I know your reference earlier on to lucid dreaming and out-of-body experiences.
That's
and
where we got to bring it back on. Yeah.
Sure, Sarah's desperate to come in on that.
Go ahead, yeah.
Actually, Mary, I was just going to say, can I hear ducks and geese in your background? Have you got birds out there?
I do. We have guinea hens outside. They're really interesting birds. Very stupid.
Have you been doing Steiner biodynamic farming?
You know, you do what you can. I don't have a cow, so I can't go the whole distance. But I use the preparations, and you know, I guess what Steiner just, there's an acknowledgement of the etheric realm in everything he does, everything, and especially in the way you garden. And we had a plot of land and that we set up a garden on, but the soil really wasn't very good. And so I began to do the preparations. And once you get into the rhythm of it, it's also planting and harvesting according to cycles of the moon and cycles of various planets. And it's a nice way to get into the rhythm of nature. And if you follow, you know, again, as much as you can, I mean, you can go full on Steiner, again, with the cow and making your own preparations. You know, I'm not going to do that, but I order them. And, you know, it's just basically, again, you make these preparations and you stir them in particular ways to create a sort of vortex that brings in the ether. It sounds very woo-woo to people, but a lot of organic, you know, giant organic gardens are utilizing his techniques. A lot of wineries are using his techniques, and they work.
The lunar cycles does also have a lot to do with moisture retention at the
Sure, absolutely, yeah.
Well, so there are kind of practical elements to it.
Absolutely, especially, even with his use of preparations involving silica, that when you have a very watery season, you use the silica because it goes onto the leaves and it reflects the light off of the leaves, and it brings more of the sun. And it's just a lot of, there's an immense practicality to Steiner in so many ways, which is why I think he's endured for so.
I mean, he did talk about spiritual science, so he kind of had that kind of scientific mind whilst thinking
absolutely
about
yeah.
I was really fascinated reading about Lichtwurzel, the light turnip that Steiner talks about. It's like you know, Steiner has a lot of businesses because a Steiner organization runs the beauty company Walida, and there are various kind of products that you can buy that have Steiner in. But one of the most popular supplements is Lichtwurzel, the light turnip, and that is the plant that is supposed to contain the highest concentration of light, and so it's really good for us to take as humans. I've always wanted to get hold of some of that. I might have to, you reminded me to buy some. But yeah, lucid dreaming, as Tony knows, I'm like really into lucid dreaming, and I run lucid dream workshops. I did one yesterday.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I did an online workshop yesterday, and it was absolutely
By the way, Sarah Martin Huxter, one of my friends, said it was absolutely wonderful, and he thought that your voice was incredible. Just to let you know,
I do sleep hypnosis, so I send myself into like a bit of a trance-like state sometimes when doing it. But I don't know whether it's something you can relate to, but I did dream mapping. So basically, I often visit the same places when I dream, and I draw them down and I describe them and I think about how they relate to my waking reality. So our project was to think about any features in our dream realms that feature water, because water is often like a really big part of dreaming and represents emotions and memory. And I have this recurring dream of drinking this water of life, or this water of memory, but also things like tsunamis, and oceans, rivers, streams, all those kinds of things. They're really, really common, and traveling by boat and arriving at a port or a harbour, really common dreams. So we did all about water, and I had a dream that night that I was on a Hollywood remake of Titanic that was set in the modern day, and it was amazing though. I was lucid, and we were in this film, but I don't think anyone else realised we were in a film, and we went all the way under. And I remember looking around this boat and seeing that I was underwater, and then remembering that in the story of the Titanic, it pops up fully again, and people think that they're okay, so they relax, and then it goes under again. So when it popped up, I quickly clambered, and in this version of the Titanic, we were next to this jetty where there were all these people waiting, and I just climbed out of the window, and then the boat went down again, and I was like, oh my, but I woke up like, oh my God, like I really remembered, because we'd been talking about water, and the plan was, if we talk about water, water will be in our dream that night. And I think it might have only worked for me.
I'd love to take one of your workshops sometime.
I should come. I'll send you some dream tea. I make a special dream tea inspired by ancient Minoan herbal recipes. So I'll post you some.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, you've got to test this dream tea. I must actually do this at some time, Sarah, and try the dream tea as well. Because one of the things, again, you mentioned about Steiner, and one of the previous guests on this show is somebody you may know, is Gary Lachman.
Oh God, yeah, I've read almost everything he's done.
Gary is wonderful, isn't he? I'm thinking, you know, I've got to get him back on in the future in terms of here on INCON, because he wrote, as you know, he wrote about Steiner, and of course, as everybody probably is aware, Gary was known as Gary Valentine, who was the original lead guitarist of Blondie.
Yeah.
Right. So moving on then, in terms of this, your experiences of the Damon, you know, you've touched upon it many times. I'm really interested to know a little bit more about this and sort of carry on with this theme for a time.
Well, again, so to explain to people, you know, on my audience, what the Damon is exactly, and please stop me and come in, but
please.
It's basically, call it what you will, it's this guidance. Maybe it's a higher self, but the Greeks, the Greek philosopher Plato had a daemon that spoke to him. I think John Lennon would talk about having, in other words, just sort of something that whispers to your artistic soul, and guides you, you know, along the way. Let me give you an example with the Dark Side of the Moon. When I started working with these two producers, they set me to work on tasks in terms of finding chants, because I was going to have to be the instrumentation, my vocals. They were going to layer and layer all of these particular chants, and they said, go find things. And I had a limited amount of time to do this, and so, you know, that's when I sort of say to this Damon, this sort of higher self, help me. I need help here, and let's do this together. And you know, when you show up for the Damon shows up for you. You know, that's one thing I'll say. And so suddenly, just like that, books fall off the shelf. Okay, and I was looking for a chant for us and them. And I was thinking, you know, us and them and World War I, you know, I was thinking of the lines drawn, you know, the map and I know Roger Waters, I think that the whole, you know, the history of World War I is very influential on him and how he writes. And
very much.
I'm fascinated by that period as well. So I'm thinking about that. And then it's like, well, then I think World War II. And then I think, wait a minute, a chant, the Bhagavad Gita. I look up at the Bhagavad Gita and then I open it up and it opens up to the page. This is the Damon, opens up to the page in the Bhagavad Gita where it's that quote, "I have become death, the destroyer of worlds," which if you know anything about the creation of the atomic bomb, Robert Oppenheimer was, in addition to being a physicist, he was a scholar of Sanskrit. And obviously he had read the Bhagavad Gita. And when he first beheld the atomic bomb, he uttered something in Sanskrit under his breath. And the translation of that was, "I have become death, the destroyer of worlds."
Do you want to hear something that's going to really send a shiver up your spine?
Okay.
I used that quote earlier on today in my book.
Get out.
Seriously.
Are you kidding?
Seriously, I'm just sitting here with shivers up my spine.
Right. So ping, ping, that's when you know if there's something going on. The other way you know that the Damon is active in your life is when those synchronicities begin to happen. And you have another word for it. You combine the two words. It's
synchronidity.
Synchronidity. So yeah. And I found the chant, and what happened is that particular chant in Sanskrit, I mean, I don't know Sanskrit, rhymed, which I didn't realize. And so it was Utu Samavada Sakaham Mubavaskabhavisiyatam. It fit perfectly into us and them. I just thought that it brought in, when you thought about, you know, the whole concept of, you know, us and them, and sort of being manipulated by the powers that be, and that what better illustration of that than that particular quote. And then there were other things. So and then then it was the other book that falls off the shelf, which is the Egyptian. I had a book of the Egyptian religion, ancient Egyptian religion, and I hadn't read it in years. I even forgot I had it. And I was thinking I had to come up with something for the opening of the whole album. And I was like, what am I going to do here? It's like that heartbeat. We didn't want to do a heartbeat. So I thought, well, it's got to be something percussive. It's got to be percussive. And then, you know, I'm thinking the pyramid on the cover of the Pink Floyd record, and percussive. And then bingo, it's like, there's the book. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. I start reading, and it said that when the Egyptians would begin a huge ritual, which would go on for hours, sometimes days, they would do it by the repetitive invocation of the god forms. And so I was thinking, let's try it. So I looked at, you know, the particular gods, and then I thought that'll work. It's like, you know, Nebhet, Sekhmet, Edhet, and Ket-et, Sekhmet, and it was perfect. And so that's how I open up the record, with that. And then I was thinking about their concept of the time before time, which was Septepi. That was sort of, you know, sort of pre-Big Bang for them. And I felt like the music was such at that point, when it goes into Speak to Me, that it was like a vortex, or like being shot through space. And so I needed something that would invoke that time before time. So I use Septepi as the chant. And then it begins to swirl faster and faster. And anyway, things like that, just the Damon will work with you. And then I was also able to bring in, with that project, I had to find all the spoken word bits, because, you know, I couldn't do what they had done. I mean, they used the doorman at the Apple Studios, and they just would record him saying various things. And so I thought, well, I think Roger Waters, to me, he resonates with me the way that some T.S. Eliot poems do, like The Hollow Men and The Wasteland and Four Quartets. So I used some quotes from some of the poetry that I liked, just in the middle of things. And there's a point on the record where there's an explosion, and right before that, I thought it'd be good to say something. And so I was remembering a quote out of Goethe's Faust, and it was I never forgot this. It was Mephistopheles, when he's asked, "Who are you?" And Mephistopheles says, "I am the spirit who denies." And I thought, ooh. So there, I say that, and then there's a huge explosion, and then we go into time. And anyway, I just got to bring in things I liked. So, you know, so. And again, I feel like you, as I say, you have to show up for the Damon, and you find that things that look like setbacks, as I said before, sometimes it's that Damon rerouting you into some other place. If you look at it that way, and you know, you can't see that except in hindsight, and you realize, my God, if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't have been in this particular place and time where something new, a wonderful new door had opened for me. And I think about my upbringing and the various twists and turns in my life. And you can't help but feel that you have been guided in some way. When you're really up to something that is important, and when you're in your dharma, you know, and then doors will open, mysterious doors will open that you could never create for yourself. I mean, I believe in sort of I do believe reality is malleable, and that you can certainly manifest things in various ways. But that the daemon is at work when you've been shaking an apple tree, working really, really hard, and then a little pear lands in your lap. You have to do the work, but then it's from the daemon when it lands, when it's something that you didn't do anything to get that. But am I explaining that correctly?
You are completely and utterly, you very much got the idea of, in my book.
I mean, I'm sure that has happened in your life as well.
Extraordinarily so, many times. And for instance, we were talking earlier on about the audible version of my book, The Labyrinth of Time, and the amount of times that things happened in the writing of that book, and indeed all my books. I find I'm at that stage now with my new book whereby I'll spend weeks and weeks messing around and not really knowing why I'm doing this. You don't know why you're doing it, but you pick snippets of information from here and there, and then suddenly they all fall into place and you go, how did that happen? I didn't even see the links, and it's just wonderful. And you suddenly have this feeling. And again, Sarah and I have mentioned this many times, and it seems to be one of the themes of this particular series of podcasts. It's the idea of standing in front of a cliff and just putting your arms out and just going with the flow, because the flow will carry you. And the daemon, having lived your life many times before, according to my hypothesis, the daemon knows the pitfalls you're going to have and needs to maneuver you to avoid those. So sometimes it's got a longer term plan, and this, it reminds me of Borges's Garden of Forking Paths, the idea that it's positioning you in some way. But I know we wanted to talk about the audible version of The Labyrinth of Time, because you mentioned something about it earlier on before we started.
Yeah. So in terms of the work that I do, or I'm going to think of a particular song, The Other Side of Time, because that grew out of A, lucid dream that I had, and B, I think about the concept of time a lot. That's why, I love that book. And for me, I don't as much resonate with the idea of repeating the same life over and over again, but I've always believed in, so I'm not sort of the Nietzsche eternal return.
Exactly. Yeah.
But so much as I am, I think certainly everything in existence moves in cycles. That's just the way.
More the Ouspensky.
More the Ouspensky. Yeah. Okay. And but I also think that I think about this a lot when I'm walking. It's like that Eliot quote, time future and time past.
Yes.
I love that. And but for me, I love the idea that the time is a continuum, and that the past and the future are happening simultaneously, that it's all, that our linear human brains just can't conceive of that. And so I was thinking, well, where is that other space? It's sort of on the other side of time. And that somewhere, and I wrote that song basically about a very close family member who died when she was very young, and I was very, very, very close to her, and I had an incredible lucid dream about her, and I was thinking when I woke up, I was just drenched with that. It was so vivid to me, and I was thinking about how much I missed her, and yet somehow in that space, in that other side of time, in that astral realm, whatever you want to call it, that she still exists. And I find, whether it's true or not, I find immense comfort in that. And so that's what I wrote the song about. The interesting thing about that time is a continuum, though. I was mentioning to you when we were writing back and forth that last year I went to this was before the whole COVID lockdowns, I went to the Monroe Institute. Finally, after all these years, I had read Robert Monroe's book, Journeys Out of the Body, when I was a teenager. And I always wanted to go there. So my husband took me there for my birthday, and I had so much fun, and I met the most interesting people, and unusual people that you not the kind of people that would normally go to, that you would expect to be at a place like that. Businessmen, and there was a wonderful doctor from Saudi Arabia, and that he had had these out of body experiences his entire life and couldn't really talk about it with anybody. And so he came there to sort of help to understand his experience. And while we were there, I got to meet Joe McGonigal, who is a rock star in the remote viewing world. I mean, oh my God, I might as well have been meeting Sting, okay? So for me, because I'm very interested in remote viewing. I don't do remote viewing myself. Having met and followed a lot of them, even though they say anyone can be taught to remote view, the truth is, if you're going to be good at it, I think you kind of have to have a talent. It's like playing piano. Not everybody's going to be Glenn Gould, okay? And so Joe McGonigal is the Glenn Gould of remote viewing, and he had been psychic his whole life, but remote viewing with which to do it. And very interesting, there's a remote viewer I follow that's sort of in the crypto world. I'm interested in cryptocurrencies, and his name is Dick Allgaier. And Dick was describing the way he learned remote viewing. This has to do with time, okay? And the technique he learned, and this was from one of the Army trained remote viewers, was to incorporate neurolinguistic programming. So it's interesting, if you know about that, neurolinguistic programming, right? Yeah. So when you look down and to the left, that's accessing memory. And so the way he learned it was to look down and to the left. And there's obviously a lot of other processes involved with remote viewing, but that was interesting to me because he's remembering the future.
Yes.
Really interesting. So it sort of has implications. And anyway, that whole world is fascinating to me. I think my husband would be very good at remote viewing. I keep trying to get him to study it and take a course, but I don't think I'd be good at it. So I'm sort of bothering.
I do love this idea of remembering the future, and it makes me think of, I'm really interested in the history of using sleep and sleep medicine.
Yeah.
And, in ancient Greek sleep temples, a lot of the last rituals involved invoking the goddess Mnemosyne, who's the goddess of memory. Yeah. And she was also utilized in dream oracle traditions, and she has this really interesting role. So she is the goddess of memory and remembrance, but she's also the goddess of eloquence, and orators and poets would invoke her before they had to recite long poems and things like this. And it makes me think, she's also the mother of the muses. So she's the source of all divine inspiration. She's the daughter of heaven and earth, and she gives birth to the muses. And the concept of remembrance with regards to Mnemosyne is this idea of being able to remember the past, present and future, and not only remember it, but make sense out of it. And in doing that, she was invoked in the last rituals in the sleep temples, because not only do you need to remember your dream, but you need to make sense of it, and you need to dream eloquently and live eloquently in order to make the best possible use of your life. But interestingly, when the Romans kind of renamed those gods, that she was renamed Moneta, so she became the goddess of money, which is really interesting because it ties in with the cryptocurrency and the idea of money as being an energy and a thought form. And I think that plays really nicely in with this idea of creating and manifesting things, because things like Steiner says, they begin in that kind of etheric realm and they become more and more solid as they filter down into material reality.
Right. It's very Platonic, Neoplatonic kind of idea as well. Yeah.
I think social media is a good example of that, because we are all becoming who we say we are on social media, or at least in the eyes of other people. You can kind of create a persona. I wonder about, this idea sometimes of AI producing replicas of people once they die, if they're programmed with every single thing that someone's experienced, every thought that they've ever had, preferences, likes, how much of a facsimile of a person can you actually make personality wise?
Yeah.
Because this is much discussed in AI, and it's ultimately called the substrate problem, and the idea of, if you could do a complete and utter copy of somebody's brain, a snapshot of somebody's brain right down to the molecular level, could you recreate them? And of course, whether consciousness can be imbued into that. And it's a very intriguing idea. You can, is a facsimile, can you facsimilize, if there's such a word, something like consciousness in some way? And it's one of the things, funnily enough, Mary and Sarah, one of the things that when you were discussing before about T.S. Eliot and the four quartets, in that I don't know if either of you have read my book, Time in the Rose Garden, which is a treatise on the British writer, playwright J.B. Priestley. And J.B. Priestley had a concept he called FIPs, which he called future influencing pasts. And quite intriguing. And again, if you spot that I particularly use the term Time in the Rose Garden as a direct reference to T.S. Eliot and the Four Quartets, because he says, isn't it, and he turns around and says, we shall go forward into the Rose Garden and do this, that, and the other. And I thought that was just a wonderful image of how time traps us, how we are part of time, but we don't really understand what time is. And of course, when you lucid dream and when you go into these states, you go into this alternate time zone almost. And again, Sarah, I would be interested in your opinion. I know that probably you would have been interested in jumping in when Mary was mentioning about the ancient Egyptians and Egyptology as well, because Mary, Sarah is very much our Egypt expert in these kind of things. And I'd just be interested if you, Sarah, wanted to ask a question or make a comment about that.
I was wondering actually if you've used any ancient instruments, because when you started to talk about your book on Egyptian religions, I was thinking, oh, I wonder if she's used a sistrum, because I feel like the ritual instrument of the inner sanctum of temples. And I do think there's something very evocative about those ancient instruments. They give you a sense of, I'm also interested in things like perfume from the ancient world. And when you talk to historians that do that kind of experimental archaeology, where they either rebuild instruments or they create Cleopatra's perfume, they say that they have this extra sensory, sudden sensation of being transported back to a time, because it's a multi-sensory experience when you recreate those things.
Oh my! Now you have me interested. That's fascinating. I've never used ancient instruments. We had a couple of medieval instruments when I recorded Ben Idi Habibi, but couple of, and an oud, which is just, that's, ouds have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. But no, I've never. But now I'm interested.
Yeah, I met a Mesopotamian ethnomusicologist, and he had rebuilt the famous lyre from Ur. And there was some fascinating things about the musicology of that time, because they had an ascending rather than a descending scale. And I'm sure I might be getting this wrong, but the sense that I took away from it, and which I like to take away from it, was that each god's name was represented by the tone of the string of the lyre. And so in playing the musical instrument, they were invoking vibrationally the god into the space.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's really good.
Very interesting
information about him. He was really fascinating character.
Oh, please do. I'd love to read about that. Yeah.
Yeah, because something, when you did the song based upon the Andalusian Arabic influences, I mean, I found that I particularly like that part of Spain. There is something magical about it. And I was wondering if you could now tell us a little bit about your interest in the occult as well, because I know that this is something that really intrigues you.
Well, I've always been drawn to sort of those arcane subjects. I feel like I have to tread carefully. I would not call myself a sort of hardcore practitioner. I mean, I don't have grimoires in my house or anything like that. I always liken that it's interesting to me. I like the history of those things. And I like reading about, especially because I'm so interested in medieval history, and it was, you know, such a basic part. It's so prevalent in that era, that I like the sort of cross-pollination of the history of magic and medieval history, and they're so tightly woven if you really know what you're talking about. When you bring up the history of Andalusia, I mean, in the 11th or 12th century, if you wanted a great education, you went down there. You went to the great universities of Toledo and Seville, and I always think if I could go back in time, that you'd study those arcane subjects. You would study astrology along with history and mathematics and those kind of things, and they were all interwoven. And so in terms of, I'm again, I guess it's more of an interest in the history. I'm fascinated with 3rd century Alexandria and Hermetic thought, and it was such a melting pot in that era of Neoplatonic thought and sort of the Jewish influences there as well. And I'm interested in how thoughts grow and cross-pollinate. So in that sense, the history of Hermeticism is just fascinating to me. But I was going to say, like, I would never, get into the Goetia or any of that, because I feel like why can't you just make things work in your own life without having to call upon some thug from the astral realm to help you? It's like the same reason I wouldn't take out a loan from a loan shark. I just don't get involved in that sort of stuff. I know it's there. I think it's very real, but I'm not I don't think it's something you want to dabble in unless you really know what you're doing. I think those things can be very dangerous to people. But I'm interested in more, I guess, the history of Hermetic thought and how it grows and weaves through cultures, Alexandria, and then it goes up through the Byzantine era, and then how it gets transported over to Europe and things like that.
What are your thoughts on the Cathari and the Albigenesian heresy?
So interesting. And, there's a lot of garbage out there written about them, and a lot in the sort of New Age movement, a lot of theories that are just wrong. But that's another whole thing. So for my audience, the Cathars were a Gnostic sect that were all over the south of France in the Languedoc area in the early medieval ages, and it was an idea. It was a Gnostic idea that came probably from the Bogomils from the Balkans, and it came down through Italy and into Spain. But there are some ideas that it may have even had older, influences that had been in that Languedoc region, because especially the Languedoc, which is in southern France, it's on the Mediterranean. And of course, you're going to have Phoenicians coming through there much, much earlier. And, again, that area is sort of a melting pot of cultures. Any kind of seafaring culture would have come there and left residues of their belief systems. And, but again, they do believe it came from the Bogomils, and it was a Gnostic Christianity that was very much at odds with the power structure of the time, which was the Catholic Church and the Vatican. And they had an ascetic ideal that was, I think, the core of their belief system, and a belief system that was Gnostic in terms of that sort of Manichaean idea of, a good versus an evil, and that there is sort of a God of this world that is a lower kind of entity versus sort of a more transcendent God that's above that. And that's the very Gnostic idea. But I think in terms of the whole, Jesus and Mary Magdalene are married, and that, if you really know the Cathars, they weren't big on marriage. I mean, that was not their ultimate idea of living the good Cathar life, the good people, they were called. And most of the time at the end of one's life, you would take what they call the consolamentum, and I often wonder what that entailed, but it was some sort of an initiatory experience that just opened you up and in some sort of massive, psychic, spiritual way, and you would become a vegetarian and again, super ascetic lifestyle, and also their ideas of Christ were very much at odds with, the Vatican. I mean, the Vatican at the time, the Catholic Church, was basically the deep state of its time. That was the power, they were the powers that be. And they were cruelly wiped out in, I guess, the 13th century and early, they were wiped out over time, basically, but it was horrific what happened to them. It was a crusade against them, and for all kinds of reasons, not just because they were at odds with the Catholic Church, but also that land in the Languedoc was really lush and beautiful, and there was a lot of money down there to be had, and so it was a land grab in a lot of ways as well. But they had the concepts fanned out into the rest of France. And there was, the whole history of the troubadours is very interwoven with the Cathars, and that there was a secret transmission that the troubadours sort of were able to disseminate. And, Sir Eleanor of Aquitaine was a great sponsor of them, and I could go on and on and on and on and on about it. But so I'm very interested, but not so much in the whole Holy Blood, Holy Grail, which was a fun book. I loved it, yeah. But I'm not so sure about that.
Yeah, because I've always been fascinated, again, as you say, the influence from the Bogomils and also the Manichaean influencing there as well. And I'd never really thought about that because of the coast and the close proximity there. And I was always intrigued by the concept of the parfait and the way in which there was the inner group. And I've always wondered, in the symbol of the Holy Grail, I've argued in some of my books, and I think I argue in the Damon, The Guide to Your Extraordinary Secret Self, but definitely within my first book, that there is linkages here that maybe the symbolic of the Holy Grail is in fact the Damon Eidolon dyad. And the idea that they were taught, of course, because you know that if you go back to Gnostic teaching, I mean, the Damon and the Eidolon concepts come from Gnosticism.
Yeah.
And therefore, could it be that the great secret they had was human conscious duality, which is very intriguing, which then takes us on, doesn't it, to the other great area of interest you have, which is Andalusia and the way the Kabbalists and everything else, there was a mixture there of the Jewish influence. And you'd be very interested to know that a previous guest on this show, Kaz Coronel, Kaz is a direct descendant of Benedict Spinoza, the philosopher.
Yeah.
But also, you'll know from Spanish history that I think it was in 1492, wasn't it, when Isabella and Ferdinand came together. Apparently, one of Kaz's direct ancestors was directly responsible for that, which is extraordinary to think, that you can go back into history to that level. Because again, Andalusia just seemed to have this incredible mixture, didn't it? It
was a mixing pot of the Ladino Jewish culture and the Moorish culture, and then also the Christians that remained in that area. And the song I sing, Ben Idea Bibi, is actually called Mozarabic, which is sort of a patois of Spanish and Arabic, and even a little bit of Hebrew thrown in. And it's beautiful. It's archaic now, but it's a beautiful language, very sensual language.
How did you discover that song then?
I was on tour with October Project. We were in Spain, and we never got days off. They plow you through from town to town to town. But we had one day off, and it was in Madrid. And I was thrilled. I left early in the morning, a hotel room, and I went out walking all day. And I stumbled upon one of those dusty old record stores, and I bought the place out practically. I had to get a new suitcase just for all the music that I bought. And I had this record, the Music of Three Cultures, and so I brought it home, you know, put it on, and I heard this song, Ben Idi Habibi, and I just fell madly in love with it. And I thought, someday I'm going to record that song. And I didn't understand the language, so I had to do some research on it. And I wrote to a professor of medieval Spanish at Indiana University, and she wrote back and told me what the interpretation of the song was, and that these were songs that were written typically by young girls. They were love songs, and they were usually slaves of the Moorish court, and they would be, I guess, trotted out to perform for dignitaries and stuff. And I couldn't help thinking that it was not unlike when we were on Sony. It just kind of reminded me of that a little bit. We got trotted out a lot. So anyway, but I fell in love with it, and I got to record it for Sony Classical. It was really nice.
What are the lyrics of the song? What in fact does the song tell of?
So the song is basically it's a girl who's been waiting for her lover, and I guess hasn't shown up all day, and that she's sort of saying, you liar, you said you were going to be here, and when you get here and when you get to my house and you kiss my little mouth, you won't be leaving too soon. That's the song, basically. Wow. And yeah, there's a funny story. When I first brought the record home, I made a tape of it, and I brought it to this girl who worked in the falafel joint that I used to get my supper at a lot. And I lived in Hoboken at the time. It was on the main street of Hoboken, and she spoke Spanish and Arabic. Her dad owned the place. And so I asked her if she could figure out, because I could hear those words, what the song meant. And she listened, and she goes, yeah, she's looking for her boyfriend, basically. That was it. So yeah, that's the song.
Wow, because I checked that out on YouTube, and I guess it must have been one of the gigs you did on your own, because there's a video of you describing the background and your discovery of that song, and you performing it in front of a very small audience.
Yeah, that was from my days when my husband was dragging me
I suspected that was the case.
That was my first little, I said, honey, I'm going to show you why I can't do this. I'm going to prove to you that, doing a song or two at an open mic night is one thing, but performing for an hour and a half can't be done. So that was one of the first things that I did to prove to him that I couldn't do it. And then I ended up actually enjoying myself.
Well, but you self-evidently were very much enjoying yourself on that one as well. It's, it's a nice intimate performance.
Again, always the Damon, it brought out another side of me that I didn't know was there. With October Project, I didn't talk. I wasn't allowed to talk. I was discouraged, and so we always had this sort of mysterious persona to the band that the company thought was a good thing. In fact, our A&R person at the time said that when any of us spoke after a song, it was he said, it's like a cup of coffee after an acid trip. So it was very much discouraged. So it brought out another side of me as a performer, and I ended up really enjoying it. I mean, I still, when I do performances just by myself, I mean, sometimes I go out with a band, and sometimes it's just me and a guitar. And because I was so insecure about my guitar playing that it would never be good enough for me, that I thought I'm going to have to engage them in other ways. I'm going to have to be so interesting to my audience that they will forget what a lousy guitar player I am. And so I started telling stories and just incorporating other parts of my life into the set in a way that I never had before. And it changed me as a performer. I never would have done it on my own. ever. Just
It
never.
reminded me a lot of Nancy Griffith and the way
I love her.
Yeah, oh, I adore her music.
Wonderful. Yeah.
She's exceptional. I really, I've got all her albums, you know, over the years. Now, remind me, have we discussed your working with Anna Rice at all so far? Have we touched upon this?
I don't know if we touched upon it, but so Anne had become a fan of October Project and the band, and I didn't tell you the story of Irene. I think I did, where she.
Yeah, you did. It was when Anthony was trying to get the YouTube clip up. So maybe.
Oh,
okay, let's do it again. Let's do it again. I'm keen to hear more.
Okay, well, I'll tell you the story again. So back in the day with October Project, we, Sony was trying to get us onto movie soundtracks, and we were hoping to get onto the soundtrack of Interview with the Vampire, which is based on the Anne Rice novel. And we didn't get the gig, but years later, a fan of Anne's told her about October Project and about me. And so she spent a day posting things on her, huge Facebook page. She has a huge audience, and she just posted YouTube videos of everything that we had ever done and everything I had ever done. And she wrote me a beautiful email, and just really, really nice. And I was laughing. I was telling Sarah that she gave me an odd compliment, that she said she had found the voice that she had been looking for her whole life. It was neither male nor female. It was perfectly androgynous. And so it's an interesting compliment, but that I understood what she meant. And so in any case, we became sort of, email friends. And when she was in New York for a writers' conference, I sent a friend of mine over to give her a copy of an album I had just made. And so as my friend is handing her the album, Anne hands her a galley of a book she had coming out called The Wolves of Midwinter. And she inscribed it to me, but she said, "Tell Mary she's in the book." So my friend Irene, who, thinks on her feet, said, "Hey, why doesn't Mary write a song for this book, The Wolves of Midwinter?" And Anne was like, "Gosh, would she do that?" And Anne said, "Leave it to me. I'll get her to do it." So I wrote the song, and it ended up getting on the audiobook. Random House loved it, and Anne loved it. And so it's a song called The Wolves of Midwinter. And, again, I love writing for a book or for a movie. I love, having that framework to write within. It's just more fun for me.
One of the things I would love you to do, and I know we've discussed this on Facebook on occasions, is to do a musical version in some way of Cheating the Ferryman. And I know that Charlie Farron, the guitarist, is very up for this. And I know that you mentioned, because that would be an extraordinary thing to do. And I know 2 or 3 musicians that would be extraordinary. Maybe we could discuss that at some stage.
We could. That'd be really interesting to me.
Yeah.
It's fun when you get to do projects that tie in, a number of different interests that you have. Do you know what I mean? It's just more fun,
Well,
like,
particularly with your influence with the Damon as well, and with the areas of overlap in terms of our own interests, in terms of time, for instance. There's so many songs that could come out of that as almost a kind of a progressive prog rock kind of concept album. What the Tales of Topographic Oceans could have been, hadn't they gone crazy and over the top, really. I think it would be quite intriguing. Sarah, have you any other points that you'd like to bring in now?
I was going to ask Mary about witches, because you said you were very interested in medieval history, and I think that witches is a subject that fascinates me, like this idea, at least, of the persecution of witches, and how having the witches or the wise women of Europe decimated over a period of time affected our culture and our folklore and our traditions.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because I've actually learned a lot from Thomas Sheridan about that, things I didn't know. I've never been into sort of the whole Wicca culture. I have nothing against it. It's just, it wasn't my thing. I don't like, as he puts it, that witchy poo stuff, it's a little too Stevie Nicks-y for me, I guess. I don't know, but he brought to my attention the fact that it really wasn't the Catholic cultures that were so into the witch burning. It was more of the Protestant cultures, and that the Catholic cultures of Europe, think of Italy and the Strega of Italy, and certainly in Irish. My mother is Irish, so she has very, very serious practicing Catholic, but very much of a folk Catholicism element to it. That there's always been a comfort level with sort of the magical element of Catholicism. I mean, it's the thing that when I was growing up, I loved about it, that it had that mystical, numinous element to it that, I don't want to get myself in trouble here, but that when I have gone to other churches, I have felt that there are certain, say, Protestant religions that, for me, as someone brought up in a Catholic home, that it was as if it was Catholic. It was sort of the structure of Catholicism with all of the juicy bits stuffed out of it.
I am sure that a previous guest here, Peter Braun, will be bouncing up and down on this, because this was a topic we discussed in a previous interview. Was about the theatricality.
The theatricality, but also, when I was younger, in my 20s and 30s, I wouldn't say I've grown out of it, but I was a member of the Theosophical Society, and I used to, go to a lot of their lectures, and they're wonderful, and, it's an ecumenical society, but I sort of went more of the Steiner route after a while, but I love the history of theosophy and its influence on the modern world and so forth. Someone should make a movie about Madame Blavatsky, by the way. So I don't know why it hasn't been done, but it should. And
good one to do a soundtrack for as well, Mary.
Oh God, I know, right? I mean, I think Shirley MacLaine 20 years ago would have made a great Madame Blavatsky. She
would indeed, absolutely.
Right? Perfect. And but in any case, Catholicism always had a magical element. And what I had heard in several theosophical lectures is that those there were, the theosophical seers, people who, could see into the other realms, often commented that when they went to a Catholic church and a Catholic mass, that if done before noon, which was pre-Vatican II, you always had to have a mass before noon, that they could, and these church, and if it was a consecrated church and so forth, that absolutely, that the angelic presences were invoked. They could see them. It absolutely, it's a ritual, and it worked. And that after Vatican II, they didn't see as that element happening. That was very interesting to me. So. And again, it was always part of, again, sort of Latin cultures in Europe, the Catholic cultures, they just accepted it as sort of part of reality. It was very comfortable with a magical element of life, in a way that Protestantism was not at all. And so it was really in Scotland and in Scandinavia, they went nuts with the witch burning, absolutely nuts with it. And really they didn't in Ireland, not much anyway. So that's what I think about that.
Yeah, very interesting. And the idea of ritual, and how ritual can bring about something in addition to the group. It's something that our little group call the egregorial in this.
Oh, have you read the Mark Stavish book?
Oh, Mark is fantastic.
That's one of the best books I've read. Oh my God.
Extraordinary. Mark Stavish. Again, Mark, I think, has been a previous guest on this show, and Mark that book is extraordinary. And it was that book that stimulated me in my previous book, The Hidden Universe, to actually apply a lot of his ideas to the concept of the egregorial. because it's an intriguing idea that, you know, we can create tulpas, we can create these thought forms that then become independent of us.
Yeah. Well, Dion Fortune talked about that a lot too, the creation of tulpas, and that these mind forms can actually take on a life of their own, and which has always been known in Kabbalistic practices, and you know.
Again,
by the way, if you could go back and I also had just finished that Peter Mark Adams book about the Saturn book, the Game of Saturn. Like,
don't know it. Tell us more.
Oh, I mean, it's so well done, and basically he's talking about a tarot deck, but it's not actually tarot, but it's a card deck from Ferrara, Italy, medieval card deck that was done for the d'Este family.
Oh,
and
right.
He goes into, I mean, it's a brilliant piece of work, and it combines medieval history and the history of the Venetian families and their whole mindset, and how it's all exhibited in this deck of this Game of Saturn, and it has implications that just blow my mind. It's right up my alley.
What's the name of the author again?
Peter Mark Adams, and he also just did a book about this room they found in Italy that had basically illustrated Dionysian, how do you say that the right way? Dionysian rites. And so it's basically a book about the history of that. And if I wish someone would really crack the code of those rites, because the Eleusinian mysteries.
Here we go, Sarah. This is what we're going to do in Greece, isn't it?
I mean, I am so interested in that, and I wish someone could figure out exactly what happened, because obviously it had a profound effect on people.
Again, somebody that had been a previous guest on the show many years ago is a guy called Dr. Andreas Mavromatis. Yeah. Mavromatis is the world's leading expert on hypnagogic imagery. And Andreas also wrote another book. He wrote a book on hypnagogy, but he also wrote another book called Traveling Light. And it was his own experiences in the 1970s with a Greek magus, like the book The Magus almost.
Which I love too. I love that book.
Oh, so do I. Absolutely.
I know you do too. I know that's a big influence on you.
Oh, massively. And funnily enough, just a very quick aside, somebody else who's very interested in that book is our friend Laura Stuckey, and she's just pointed out your incredible resemblance to Nicole Kidman, and I have to agree. You know, you must have heard that many times. But going back, Sarah and I were involved in a recreation of Plato's Cave almost this time last year, April, 2 years ago. And we are intent, with the hope of my Greek publisher, to actually recreate a lot of the Eleusinian mysteries in Greece sometime in the future. And it'd be wonderful if maybe you could come along and maybe perform and maybe sing, because that would be extraordinary.
That would be just heaven for me. I would love that. Please keep me in the loop on all that.
Oh, we will, because Sarah, can you imagine?
I mean, how are you going to
I found the cave. I did some research, and I found a paper from 1905 written by a Harvard archaeologist, and he names the cave, and the cave still exists. And it is around about 25 miles south of Athens along the coast road. My publisher knows a lot of people in Greece and in Athens. He's very influential, my Greek publisher down there. And we think we can engineer it, that we can actually use this location for it. Now, there is also a group of filmmakers called Dreaming Draguas, and they're wanting to get involved. And the plan is that we'll also video it using a drone. So the idea is the program will start, or the program will start with a drone flying over the Acropolis, flying out over the nearby Aegean Islands and the ones in the Saronic Gulf, flying in over Cape Sunion, and then looping round out to sea, and then flying straight into the cave, straight into me, and hovering in front of me. And I just stand there and go, "Welcome to the mysteries." And we think that would be an extraordinary start to it. And what we're planning to do using VR, using the lucid light devices, which you probably know, the hypnagogic light machines that I write about, we're going to hopefully get a group of us go down there and recreate Plato's cave in Plato's cave, but also bringing in the areas, because there's a friend of ours, Lena, as well, who's Greek, who might be able to help with this. And we think this could be quite extraordinary. And, you know, and we might...
bringing hallucinogens?
Yeah, I was just going to say, we need
who's got the soma?
Yeah.
Well, we can probably get Dr. David Luke involved again, who was a previous guest here as well. So we're really cooking on gas. Oh, I keep saying that. I shouldn't say that. An awful thing. I keep saying it. Right. Just as we're getting to the end, and it's just, are there any questions you'd like to ask me about my work at all, or any points you'd like to make before we finish?
Well, really, other than just how I really, it's such a pleasure to speak with you finally, because I've loved your work so much, and love the Labyrinth of Time. Listening to it again on the audio has been just wonderful, and love the Damon. And I just you know, and I continue. It's going to be interesting to see all of them. I'm going to go back and now read some of the other things that you were speaking about, and I just want to thank you for the work you've done. It's been a big influence on me. So, you know, and it's so much fun now that all of our interests kind of are interwoven, and I never get to discuss these things with anybody. I mean, my husband is he's a scientist. He's very open-minded, but you know, he's just not that interested.
Do you know, one of the things,
I don't bore him.
We have this little group, and we're all being drawn together because we feel that we are sort of outsiders, as Colin Wilson would use the term. And we're all being drawn together, and our Damons are drawing us together. I mean, Sarah and I met when we did the event. We did another event where we reproduced Plato's cave in Draculo, which is a fascinating location in the Midlands in the UK. And that's when Sarah and I first met. We knew each other before, but that was the first time we'd met. And that group that was involved in that event, you know, we're rock solid. We really are working together very, very closely on a lot of separate but similar projects. And I really do believe we're going to create something extraordinary. My Damon is screaming at me all the time to say this is what's going to be happening, and that your Damon is saying the same thing, you know, tells me that we're going to do something, or some of us are going to do something quite extraordinary.
Well, okay. What my Damon was saying was find the others. You have to find the others. Really important, especially in everything that's been going on in the world.
I think that what's going on at the moment is all part of it. And I think it all links in some way. And it would be wonderful, again, you know, if next time I'm over in the States, because I'm supposed, again, because of lockdown, I haven't been able to do Contact in the Desert in California, but I will be doing it online this year. And next year, hopefully I'll be over in the States doing it in Southern California. And it would be really great if a group of us could get together there as well.
Oh, that would be really great. Wonderful. Yeah. Keep me in the loop.
Will do. Okay, is there any contacts that, because I'm sure that everybody is going to be absolutely fascinated by your work, and I'm hoping that you have to listen to Mary's music. It is extraordinary. There is nobody I know that has a voice like you have. It is just absolutely wonderful. Absolutely.
Well, there's lots of stuff on YouTube. You know, you can just go to YouTube and type my name in, and there's all kinds of videos. And I have a website, maryfahl.com, and I have a video section there. And I tour, although I have been off this year. I don't have a show until the end of April, if that. But I'm hoping to get back to performing live again. And I would also encourage you to look up the old October Project, music of our first two records. I'm very proud of that work from back then. It was a group effort. But anyway, there's all kinds of things out there that you can listen to. And if you happen to live in the States, come and see me sometime. I have dates up on my website, and live performance is very important to me. You know, it's just, I've been trying to do the streaming concert thing, but it it's really awkward. I just am not used to it yet. And there's something about in theater or in music, the resonance of a live performance is something very special that humans need. And I think that people are deprived of that right now. So I'm hoping that all gets back up and running again. So that's it.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I mean, there are a few singer-songwriters I really love, like Mary Chapin Carpenter has been doing it quite regularly, and Suzanne Vega and various other individuals, Sean Colvin. And they're really interesting. They're interesting to see somebody in their own environment, particularly Mary Chapin Carpenter, because she seems to do it from her kitchen when she's got her dogs wandering around.
Yeah.
And to see here songs that you've loved for many years, like This Shirt and songs like that being performed like that is wonderful. But we need live concerts. We need the live feedback. And again, there's somebody I'm toying with there. I must put you in contact with, is a guy called Steve Balsamo, who is an incredible Welsh singer-songwriter musician, who's also very into my work. And I think that I just feel my Damon just say Steve Balsamo. And I think there's a reason for that. And he's, again, somebody we need to get onto a future show. Okay, thanks everybody for listening in. Mary, you've been absolutely wonderful. It has been, again, 2 hours just
I told you.
It's just flash by. So thanks very much for everybody. Thanks everybody for listening in. We've got another show on Thursday, again, where we're going to be discussing dimethyltryptamine and its links to near-death experience with one of the young up-and-coming researchers in the subject who's doing his PhD in that very subject. So look forward to that as well. So speak to you all soon, and look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thanks, Mary.
Bye,
and again, as always, thanks, Sarah. Thanks.
Hi, Anthony.
Thanks. Bye-bye.